Hi. Can everybody hear me okay out here? Great. Well, I don't have very much opportunity to get wired up and talk to people, so I really appreciate this opportunity and really want to thank the school, my alma mater, for embracing me, for Cynthia and Jonathan to give me this opportunity to talk to all of you, and for Lou and Lynette and Amy Spooner and everybody that I've met during the course of this past year or so that have been just so gracious and so welcoming, and you're all very lucky to be at this fantastic school under this great leadership. I started my career in architecture at Michigan at Taubman College for Architecture and Urban Planning. I didn't realize how much of an urban planning dimension I was gaining, even being as an architect. It's just part of the ethos and how the school operates and works. And I think it's really great to come back and feel that spirit still here, that I have carried with me throughout my career. And it's really great to come back and feel like the school is even better and even stronger than it was when I was here. So with that, I'm going to try to pace this talk to about half an hour. If I start hurrying up or if I need to slow down, please help me out. But I do want to make sure that we leave some time for questions at the end. So with that, I'll start at kind of my academic capstone. After leaving University of Michigan, I moved to New York. I studied at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, which has been defunct and now I think has re-risen again, and then did my graduate studies at Yale University. But it was really this opportunity, I was very fortunate to have this opportunity to do an academic capstone in Europe, in Switzerland. And I was really following along some interest that I had in the architecture of Ticino. It's the Italian part of Switzerland, and at the time, Mario Botta, Mario Campi were very popular architects on the map, and I was very interested in exploring Kenneth Frampton's critical regionalism. So kind of used this area of Ticino as a tool to really pursue these dualities of Italian cultural expression with Swiss craftsmanship, of innovation in interventions in the landscape with history. And so there just seemed to be all these dualities that I was very interested in, stretching my sensibilities of what I think architecture is. So that was a really great experience for me. And then simultaneously, as I was going through preparing myself for architecture career, this is only one of two diagrammatic slides, I promise, but I thought it would be a good way to discuss a traditional architecture model, which is what most of us had learned. And it's really, you know, the typical architect, client, and contractor relationship. It's, you know, the AIA documents and the process of professional practice is really set up this way. It really revolves around, you know, the project scope, budget, and schedule, which all three entities have to relate to, but the architect's role is really more designing for the client and preparing the documents. The actual contractual relationship is between the contractor and the client for the actual work. So in a broad sense, that's how things are set up. They're set up that way in sole practices. They're set up that way in corporate, large commercial projects that I worked in. I worked on one high-rise in New York, and then, as Jonathan said, I'd worked in quite a few small practices, residential and small commercial practices. Then there's also other practices that are industry specific, whether it's healthcare or campus planning or so forth. But during this time, I did what everybody does. You work for different studios, different practices. You take your architectural exam, you join the AIA, and then you try to launch your career. So once I was prepared with all that, I decided that somehow the West Coast really resonated, was drawing me. I think there was a lot of creativity culturally there. There was a lot of innovation going on. So my aspirations were to move to LA, look at the urbanism there, from a different lens than what I had experienced in Michigan and the East Coast and in Switzerland, but there were some, I was really wanting to explore those dualities of urbanism and landscape and climate and intervention, and there was so much work going on in the early 90s. It was a very, very interesting time to be there. I worked at the UIG group, which was a very interesting practice affiliated with the UCLA Architecture School. So we were doing work with faculty members at UIG, and students were learning from us. They were doing all the drawings for actual physical projects. So that was really great while that work lasted for a couple of years, and then the recession of the East Coast caught up with the West Coast, and boom, there I was. No work, no nothing. So what did I do? I hung out my shingle. I didn't know that many people there, but I did have a few colleagues from back east that helped me very much in connecting with a few opportunities. I did get some small commissions during that time. I also decided that I needed to use the time that I had. I had a lot of free time. I was networking, I was doing some volunteer work for community centers, but I also, at the time, you guys will probably laugh, I'm really dating myself, but I taught myself AutoCAD. You didn't have that in schools, but I figured, well, all right, this is not a skill that I have. I like to draw, and to this day, I'll roll out my tracing paper and draw, as my family will attest to our little home projects that I've done. But it was really something that I knew that I needed to learn if I was going to stay relevant, relevance being the key word. The other thing that I did was I put my head up, looked in a lot of different directions, and it seemed that there was a very pragmatic, very practical thing that was very new in the field of architecture, which is the ADA. The civil code was passed in 1990, and it just seemed to me that that was going to impact architecture in a very profound way, and not in all the really cool designy ways that you think when you come out and you think you're going to design these really great things, but there's a very practical side to it. And I thought, but that might be a good key for me to get into. Everybody's going to have accessible ramps, accessible restrooms, and so on and so forth. So I became an expert in that. I took some seminars. I figured out what that was going to be all about and how that might impact architecture. So I started doing that. And I was very fortunate to have a friend who was working at Paramount Pictures in their planning and development department. She knew of my expertise, and she came across her responsibility to do an ADA survey for the whole lot. So big enterprises needed to start showing that they were implementing this new code, this new requirement, so that they wouldn't basically be subject to lawsuits by the general public. So especially big enterprises, campus environments, big companies tend to be targets because they have deep pockets. So they needed to have a program in place to demonstrate that they're doing what they can. So I was that person. So I had the glorious job of going around to every building on the Paramount Studios lot with my little meters, my little pressure meters to measure the pressure of the doors, and my tape measure to measure the clearances off to the sides of the toilet rooms and how high the sinks were, and complete a report and a survey. And it took a long time, which meant that I got paid for a lot of hours, which meant that I could maintain my lifestyle a little bit in Los Angeles, and those things just started to connect for me. Then once I was done with the report, they needed to implement this. So then they started giving me commissions. So I'd had my architectural license in California by that point, and I had a practice, so I could, got these commissions and started engaging in contracts with the Paramount Pictures studios, which was kind of beyond me, having been there for just 2.5 or 3 years, but there I was. Something was starting to happen. So then they had a shift within their planning and development department and offered me a position. And I said, okay, I'll give up my sole proprietor practice for a little while. This is really good. This will be a good way to make some money for a little while. And then my intention was I was going to go back to private practice and continue my residential commercial career. But as I started working there, I realized there is so much to be done at the studio level, at the campus level. And I fell into this role of being, and this is a little bit complicated, but bear with me, the project manager's role in the studio. I can't quite get this thing to work, but you can see. So the project manager's role is really a dual role. I was still kind of the architect, to service the studio. So I was still kind of having my architect hat on and working with in-house departments and divisions to build out their spaces. But at the same time, I was then given the responsibility to go out and hire the people that were actually going to do the work. So there was this duality. On the left side, there was still this typical way of constructing projects. There were still project goals, there were still budgets, there was still a schedule. But on the right side, I became the manager and I became the client of maintaining the project, the schedule, and the budget for those projects. So it just got very expansive. And then I realized that I wanted to be more than just the design manager. I wanted to be the project manager for everything soup to nuts on these projects because I felt that I could do it. It became very, very interesting to me. So I did another pivot and got a job at Warner Brothers, which is where I've been for now 17 and a half years. And I have to say, the thing that I really, really enjoy about working at Warner Brothers is during the course of my time, you'll see on the left side, that's the campus environment. It's in Burbank. We have about 100 acres on this lot, and then we have another lot that's up the way a bit. And I've done such a variety of projects that I've managed over all these years, and it's building relationships within the company, having them trust you, but also having the skill set to do, for instance, this Warner Village. That used to be, when's the last time anybody saw a Western movie? Name the last Western that you saw, right? This was the site. We had about 10 acres of a Western lot, the authentic Western lot. I can't even tell you which movies, but I'm sure you or your parents have seen some of them. But we realized from a real estate perspective on this campus, it was such valuable property, and we weren't getting the production value of using that space. So our production folks and the head of the studio decided, well, you know, what if we had some production offices, but we could actually make it a street that we could rent out for shooting for, you know, Midwest or kind of a generic street. So we basically developed a neighborhood. We did the street, we did the utilities, we built 11 houses on it. And those houses the facades we worked with a set designer from the Gilmore Girls so that they were each a little bit different, but they were all authentic. And so that when a commercial or a TV production was looking for sites to film at, they would be, you know, it would be an authentic kind of place to film. So it was really fun. It was my first experience working with the set designer, but on real architecture projects. So it had this kind of duality, this twofold purpose for it. The other things that we've built are very functional. The parking structure, 700 plus people parking structure. We worked with the city of Los Angeles. We had to get entitlements. It was next to the LA River. We worked with the Corps of Engineers. So from a planning perspective, it was really very complicated and had to go all the way up to the state and get reviewed. It was part of a Forest Lawn Drive is a scenic highway, so there were height restrictions. We had to build green walls this is an old photograph. Right now you can't even see the building. The whole facade of it has a green vine growing up it. It was in a hillside. It gets flooded when we get mudslides. I mean, it was just a mess, but we managed it. And the more parking, of course, is an issue everywhere, particularly in Los Angeles. You've heard we have a few cars. So when we have audience stages, when we're in high production, when we have people, just a huge volume of people coming, we need to have, a lot more parking structures. We've built stages, and I'll get to that. That's the tilt-up stage, concrete tilt-up stage that we built. We've built several of them. This was the first one that we built. A newer one, you can see it matches the typology of all the old stages from the 1920s when Warner Brothers when the brothers Warner first started building stages. But now we have new technology, right? So on a very tight, dense site, we had tilt-up construction. So it was like a jigsaw puzzle. You had to pour the concrete, tilt them up, hold them up, and then have enough space on that same site to do the next side going up all the way around. So, it's figuring out the logistics, all the practical things is what when we build something, this is our family. We work with the same people over and over and over again. We have a construction department that will be the general contractor, and they'll hire all the sub-trades. So we have a very familial and collegial environment, and that's the other thing that's really great about working at Warner Brothers. So we have to figure out all the logistics. Then we do old buildings that need repair. So we do infrastructure repairs. This building on the center there had some rotting glulam beams that are 40 years old. So how do you hold a building up when you're replacing those beams? A lot of it's just logistics, but it's a lot of fun. Then we also do interior projects. There's the technology of the studio. Gosh, I could talk for hours about that. Editing facilities have to have a lot of acoustic isolation, a box in a box. We cut the floor so that there's no structural borne noise in between. And sometimes we're building these studios in existing old buildings from the 20s or 30s or 40s, and you have to really build this little jewel inside of an old structure, so that can be very challenging. But I have learned a lot about what it takes to record sound, what it takes to record Foley, which is the sounds that are layered into a film or TV show. Like anytime anybody is walking or stepping, that's not real recording. There's a studio that those sounds are recorded in, and there are Foley artists, and they have a very particular acoustic requirement within those spaces. Then there's voiceovers, so where you record voices is very different from where you record the footsteps and sounds. And then there's music recording, so we have scoring stages. And then in the final editing room, that's where all those different layers come together, and the producers and directors sit in these type of edit bays, and they pull it all together. So it's really about the reputation of these spaces. They have to be state-of-the-art. They have to be cool and hip and contemporary, and have to have food on the side like this. But they build a reputation. So we not only design them from the technical aspects, have to be really very sophisticated, but it's got to have a cool vibe too. So it's kind of fun to work with those people. We also have a VIP studio tour on the lot, and we're the only studio that has a behind-the-scenes look of it's not like Universal Studios where you go on the rides, which is great, and we have Harry Potter experience up there, and that's wonderful. But the thing that the culture at Warner Brothers is, we're there to work with you. We're there to make any production that comes to the studio. We'll help you with set lighting and grip. We'll help you with graphics. We can do the post-production editing. We can do sound. We can do everything all on the studio lot. It's a very integral campus environment, kind of like a university environment. Everything can happen within the context of that. So we've developed this exhibit that is called Script to Screen, where you come through a stage that we repurposed for that mission, for an exhibition of all the steps along the way to production. And then when the guests come out, they're greeted by a coffee shop that's kind of a la Central Perk from Friends, which is one of our favorite TV shows still. And then a retail shop where you can get all things Harry Potter, all things Justice League, all things Big Bang Theory, whatever. And that's a very curated, very crafted environment. We bring things in from our archives, all our sets and film production artifacts go into this huge warehouse, and it's all cataloged. And if we're working on projects, special projects like this, we get to go into the archives, into the museums, and then get to pull stuff in and then figure out how we're going to hang the top of this replica of the Harry Potter bridge and hang it from the ceiling of this new structure that we put together, and then get the lights around it and get all the air conditioning and everything to work around that. So we work with, again, I want to emphasize that we work as a team on these in-house projects with our electricians, with our carpenters, with our mechanical engineers, with our production staff. I mean, it really does take a village to put these types of projects together. And when I'm assigned to a project like this, I'm kind of like the orchestra leader. You know, I need to make sure that the finance people keep the money flowing and that the contracts are going through legal and that the production operations isn't destroyed by us building something during that time. It's really orchestrating all of those logistical and checks and balances in a big enterprise. And I have to say I really like that, because the people that you end up building relationships with across the board are people that are not architects. It's those relationships with people that, you know, maybe you're interested. I don't know. I've just learned so much about so many different disciplines, and it really comes down to those relationships with the people that really allows us to have great success in doing these type of projects. The other thing that I was inspired by at Warner Brothers, we've had a sustainability program on the studio lot for over 20 years. And you've all heard of LEED, and now everybody's LEED accredited professionals. I did this pretty early on in you know, the time when people were starting to get accreditation. I just felt that it was something that was really important for me as an architect, to understand how to build things equitably and sustainably. It was also a good credential, much like getting the ADA credentials early on really helped propel my career. This really helped me be part of the team within Warner Brothers that really put Warner Brothers on the map in Hollywood and as well as, you know, nationally. We were the first ones to get a building certified of all the different studios. It was the first one, was this one on the left. It was an office building, and we were engaged with USGBC as a pilot program. And so we helped develop some of the standards as we were going through and going through those very meticulous and mundane, difficult checklists. But we did help them with that process. So that was really enriching at the beginning. And then the other project that I worked on in 2010 was the first LEED Gold stage. It's the first stage that was certified LEED in the industry, which is a huge thing because stages are very unique building types that didn't fit into any one specific category. So we worked with USGBC. How could we categorize this? We don't have air conditioning for this building. What productions do is they bring air conditioning to the site and then they plug it in. So you know, how you calculate energy and water and all of that and electricity was pretty interesting. We did put solar on the rooftop, and I think that's what really got us over that energy credit. Solar is another big initiative of the studio. We have many rooftops, and as we can afford it, we put more and more solar. We generate, I think now it's up to about 700 kilowatt hour metric. I'm not really sure what the metric is, but we're hoping to get up to 1 meg pretty soon. So the company continues to invest in that, and that's really great. Then we get into the other part of corporate real estate's portfolio. I work in the corporate real estate department, and part of that department helps with projects that are owned, which is all the work that I was showing you on the studio lot. That whole lot and all those buildings are owned by Warner Brothers. Then we have a whole other portfolio that we manage as well of leased buildings, and those leased buildings really house office space for all the different divisions across the company, you know, digital entertainment, film production, TV production, international distribution, marketing. There's all these different divisions, probably, I don't know, dozens of them. And then we have other companies like DC or, you know, other specific divisions, part of digital entertainment. So they all need office space. So headquarters office space is in Burbank, but then all these divisions have office space around the world. And our group, the corporate real estate group, manages those leases, and we manage the fit outs, the build out, the tenant improvements of those spaces. And so we have to work with metrics, with standards, how many square feet per person. It kind of depends if they need to do production facility for games or not, because then you need to have some more production space. But primarily we're in charge of all that. So in 2004, 2006, Warner Brothers Digital Entertainment was a new division that started, and they started investing in video game production. And so the first studio was up in Seattle, suburb of Seattle. They were in terrible space, so we went and got them a lease in new space and then built that space out. The other one that I've worked on is in Chicago. That's where this mocap studio, we built that out for them. It's the red studio you can see on the left. Motion capture, you probably know, is like guys get in suits and they have little nubs all over them and they perform the stunts and the action and in these spaces, and there's cameras all the way around that grab those sensors, and then that becomes the action of the game, so that it's more fluid, it's more realistic than just doing an animation. Every game studio would like to have one of these, but we can't, not every game studio creates the games that make enough profit in order for every studio to have it. So it's kind of a bit of a trade-off. It gets a little bit political within the corporate structure of who gets, you know, the support spaces that they want and need. If they fire off a great game, sure, we'll go in and give you a new deck, or we'll give you a new mocap studio, but that gets to be part of the thing. There's also a lot of these not a lot, but each studio will have these edit type rooms, which are very different from the post-production sound. They're not as sophisticated. They don't need to be as sophisticated to record and layer the music for a video game than it would be for a motion picture. So we really need to tailor the technology to what the end purpose is. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, right. So with the video game technology, I've gotten to know that group pretty well. Each studio head has a little bit different mandates. Some are doing big console games, some are doing mobile apps. For instance, this big photograph on the upper left is a studio that we just finished building out outside of Boston. It's the Turbine video game studio. And what happens is these studios sometimes feel a little bit removed from Burbank, from headquarters, because these people, you know, they work in their own environment. They're part of our company, but they don't always feel that. So part of our job as designers going out to work with these companies is to make them feel part of the fold. And one way that we do that is we work with the art directors of these studios and get them in touch with our design studio at Burbank to brand and do things within their studio space collaboratively. So, for instance, this big mural was from the Game of Thrones game that this Turbine Studio published recently, and their art directors worked on this environment and the characters, and then they sent it to the design studio. The design studio tweaked it, and we gave them the size of the wall, and we have these huge ViewTech printers that print billboard-size things on any material. So they printed this, shipped it out, and then we hung it up on the wall. So that's the kind of thing that the art directors at the studio really appreciated. They felt like they could work with home office. They could do something that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise on their own. We do a lot of logo work. There's a lot of proprietary graphics and logos and everything. So that all gets cleared by headquarters, and then we can implement that. But as I've been talking to these studio heads, there's a couple of interesting things that have come up. I was asking one of the veteran directors from WB Games in Chicago. I said, where do you get your, how do these virtual environments get developed? Who are the people that do it? He said, well, sometimes they're artists, but he said, I have to say that my best, I'm going to quote this. One of my best environmental concept artists is trained as an architect. What makes him so good is his ability to turn fantasy of the game into a credible and realistic environment. The sense of moving through space, the proportion, architectural detailing, especially lighting, and the knowledge of how to depict it in the drawings is not something other artists think of. Architects think about how a four-eyed monster would move through a castle and depict the castle that way. And these qualities bring a sense of realism to the game. So this is the art director. Their job is to make these fantasy worlds as realistic as possible. And it's really architects that he finds have that vision to be able to connect that, very, very effectively. And then another studio head, I was talking to him about, this idea of conceptual realism and how important that is in game development. This is a mobile app game developer, so they don't have the big consoles, they don't have as much to invest in the virtual environment, but they too are starting to work with, local universities and local talent of how to put together a new media relationship in terms of virtual reality, because it's no longer just the console games. They need to figure out how to develop games in the VR world. And so I anticipate that we're going to be spending some of our Warner Brothers investment developing these VR studios so that these game developers can start developing the games within a VR environment. What's unique about a VR environment? And again, I think that's going to be adding yet another level of architectural reality scrutiny, because if you're in that VR environment, you can see the details even more and experience it spatially even more. So maybe we'll have a VR studio here soon. I don't know. Anyway, and this image on the right is just an image from one of the websites that one of the studio heads was telling me about. There are companies out there that they don't do all the conceptual realism in-house because they just don't have the staff, but there are companies out there, and one of them I think was Adam Hawk, and they hire out to these firms that do nothing but this conceptual realism. So, for instance, that would have been something from a video game that an architect designed and would have been contracted by a video game company to these third-party houses that just do these conceptual realism things.